Imagine a warm Sunday afternoon in a quiet suburb of Oregon. Margaret, a woman in her early 60s, sat by the window of her cozy kitchen, gazing thoughtfully at the backyard where her grandchildren once played. The golden light poured in, warming the simple wood table where she now rested her hands. Hands that had spent a lifetime giving rides to soccer practice, giving homemade casseroles on stressful days, giving money quietly slipped into envelopes marked "just in case." Giving advice, even when it was wrapped in silence, in a glance, in a worried sigh. And now, as retirement unfolded like a book with blank pages, Margaret thought, maybe it's time to give one more big gift: the family lake house, the savings account, a few generous checks to make their lives easier. After all, isn't that what a good mother does? But that afternoon, her old neighbor, Mr. Howard, a retired schoolteacher known for his quiet wisdom, wandered over to her porch with a cup of coffee in hand, and as they talked about life, he said something that stuck in Margaret's mind like a splinter. "Margaret, sometimes giving too much is like overwatering a plant. You don't help it grow, you drown it." She laughed politely then, thinking he was just being cautious, even a little cynical. But that night, lying in bed, the words stirred something restless inside her. What if, in her eagerness to protect, she was quietly weakening her children's ability to stand on their own? What if, by giving too much, she was not blessing them, but robbing them? You see, in today's world, love often disguises itself as constant giving. But the ancient Stoics, people like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, taught a very different lesson. Love, at its highest form, is not controlling. It is not rescuing. It is preparing. Preparing others to walk their own path, preparing them to fall and rise again. Today's video is not about withholding love. It's about transforming love into something stronger, wiser, and ultimately, more enduring. Together, we're going to explore 7 things you should never give your children, no matter how much you love them. Not because you're cold-hearted, but because you are brave enough to love them with vision, not just emotion. By the end of this journey, you will see that sometimes the greatest act of giving is learning when to hold back. Because what your children need most is not a life without struggle, but the confidence to face struggles without fear. Stay with me. And Margaret sat at the breakfast table the next morning, a checkbook in hand. She had been thinking, maybe a little financial cushion would give her son, David, the breathing room he needed. A chance to finally relax, she told herself. But somewhere in the quiet, Mr. Howard's voice returned. "Overwatering the plant, Margaret." She sighed. You see, giving money to our children, especially when life seems so full of hurdles, feels natural. It feels right. But there is a hidden danger wrapped inside that easy generosity. Because when we hand over money without teaching the discipline behind it, the patience, the effort, the mistakes, and the learning, we're not giving freedom. We're giving dependency. Easy money is like a river with no banks. It spills everywhere, loses its direction, and eventually drowns the field it was meant to nourish. David was a good man, kind-hearted, full of dreams, but he had never learned how to manage scarcity, how to stretch a dollar, or how to prioritize. Not because he was careless, but because Margaret had always made sure he never had to. And now, standing at this crossroads, she wondered, am I about to make the same mistake again? The Stoics taught a vital truth. It is not wealth itself that corrupts, but the undisciplined relationship to it. Epictetus warned that external things, money, possessions, even success, must be handled like something on loan, not something that defines us. When money comes too easily, it doesn't teach gratitude. It doesn't build resilience. It doesn't awaken ambition. It creates entitlement. It teaches the mind to believe, if I wait long enough, someone will rescue me. And nothing kills a human spirit faster than the slow erosion of self-reliance. Margaret thought back to her own life, how every small victory, every bill paid, every savings account built from pennies, had shaped her, had strengthened her. had quietly whispered, "You are capable." Would David ever hear that whisper, if she silenced it with another check? She placed the pen down. Tears welled up. Not from sadness, but from a fierce kind of love. The love that wants to see someone become, not just be comfortable. Instead of handing David a gift of easy money, Margaret made a different plan. She would sit down with him, talk about his dreams, help him build a simple budget, maybe even match his savings dollar for dollar if he set financial goals and met them. Because the real gift isn't the money itself. It's the self-worth that grows from earning it. It's the difference between giving a fish and teaching how to fish. A cliché, yes, but only because it is so enduringly true. In the garden of love, discipline is the sunlight. Without it, nothing truly grows. So if you are standing today like Margaret at the threshold of giving, ask yourself, am I building their wings or tying them tighter to the ground? True generosity gives tools, not crutches. Opportunities, not shortcuts. Faith in their ability, not fear of their discomfort. And as Margaret folded her empty checkbook back into the drawer, she smiled for the first time that morning. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. A few weeks later, Margaret found herself leafing through a folder of old papers, deeds, titles. The small cabin by the lake she and her late husband had cherished for years. David had always loved that cabin. As a boy, he spent endless summers there, fishing off the dock, building fires, getting lost under the stars. Maybe, Margaret thought, this could be my real gift to him, a piece of our family's heart. The idea warmed her, and yet a quiet unease stirred beneath the sentiment. Because memories, however golden, do not pay property taxes, nostalgia doesn't patch leaky roofs. And Margaret knew, deep down, that ownership was not just a matter of joy. It was a burden, too. She remembered Mr. Howard's words once again, like a lighthouse in a fog. A gift that's not prepared is a gift that can weigh heavier than any debt. Giving David the cabin would not just hand him freedom. It would hand him responsibility, insurance bills, repairs, maintenance costs, even the emotional strain of caring for something he hadn't asked for. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, "He is not poor who has little, but he who craves more." Margaret realized that sometimes, without meaning to, we force craving onto others, handing them possessions they're not ready to cherish or even want. It's easy to imagine gifts will be received as blessings, but without preparation, they often become invisible anchors. A study from the University of Michigan found that inherited property, especially when unexpected, often leads to family conflicts, financial strain, and emotional distancing. The dream home becomes the battleground. The cherished cabin becomes the albatross. Margaret closed the folder gently. She decided not to rush, not to announce a grand surprise. Instead, she invited David to lunch. They sat by the window of a small diner, sipping coffee, watching the leaves turn amber and gold. She asked him about his life, his plans, his burdens. Slowly, naturally, the cabin came up. David smiled when he spoke of it, the way you smile at a childhood friend you haven't seen in years. Fondness, yes, but not necessarily longing. Margaret, instead of offering the cabin outright, asked, "If you had the cabin, what would you want to do with it?" David hesitated. "Honestly, Mom, I love the memories, but I don't think I could handle the upkeep. I'm barely managing my own place." Relief flooded her chest. In that moment, she realized she had almost handed her son a burden disguised as a gift. Instead, they agreed to keep visiting the cabin together, renting it out part-time to cover maintenance, and eventually, maybe, selling it when the time was right. No surprise deeds, no unspoken expectations, only clarity, choice, and respect. Stoicism teaches us that true love is not about clinging, it's about understanding. We do not own the people we love. nor should we tie them to dreams they did not choose. A gift is not truly a gift if it comes with invisible chains. And as Margaret watched David laugh that afternoon, lighter, freer, she knew. Real gifts don't weigh others down. They lift them up. The seasons changed. Winter crept over the town like a soft grey blanket, dusting roofs, quieting streets. Margaret found herself spending more time indoors, baking pies, knitting by the fireplace, thinking. One evening, David called, "Mom, I'm thinking about switching careers. I'm scared. But staying where I am feels worse." Margaret felt her heart leap into her throat. Without thinking, she nearly said, "David, you can't leave a stable job right now. Think about your mortgage. Think about your insurance." But she caught herself just in time. She remembered. Love, when wrapped too tightly, suffocates. Years ago, when David was in high school, she had hovered over every homework assignment, every college application, every decision, out of love, out of fear. She thought she was helping. But maybe she had been building walls instead of bridges. Mr. Howard's advice echoed in her mind. A life fully controlled is a life half-lived. Stoicism, too, teaches us that the only true control we have is over ourselves, not over the paths our children must walk. It's their storm to navigate, Margaret whispered to herself, their wings to spread. So this time, instead of offering advice, warnings, or lectures, she said something new. "David, tell me what you're most excited about." There was a pause. Then, for the first time in a long while, David's voice lit up like a candle. "I want to start my own small woodworking business, build furniture, work with my hands. It's something I've dreamed of for years." Margaret smiled softly, unseen. She didn't interrupt. She didn't project her fears onto him. Instead, she listened, truly listened, and without trying to mold, fix, or protect. The ancient Stoic Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't force things to behave as you wish. Wish instead that they behave as they do, and you will find peace." When Margaret hung up the phone that night, a quiet peace filled her living room. She hadn't solved David's problems. She hadn't saved him from failure, but she had given him something even more precious: space, trust, belief in himself. In the months that followed, David worked 2 jobs. He saved, he failed, he doubted. But little by little, he built his dream from scratch. He called Margaret sometimes, not for solutions, but for encouragement. Not because he needed rescuing, but because he knew she would listen without judgment. And Margaret realized, guidance is not about grabbing the wheel of someone else's life. It's about walking beside them, lantern in hand, while they find their own way. As she watched David set up his tiny workshop one crisp spring morning, Margaret felt something deeper than pride. She felt awe at who her son was becoming, not because of her plans, but because of his own courage. Children don't need us to pave their roads smooth. They need us to believe they can handle the bumps. And sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is not protection, but quiet confidence. You are capable. You are strong. And I trust you to write your own story. Margaret tucked her hands into her coat pockets, smiled at the bustling little workshop, and turned back toward home, lighter, freer, and full of faith. It happened during a birthday dinner. Margaret had prepared her famous roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and that warm apple pie everyone loved since childhood. The table was full. Emily with her quiet eyes, Mark cracking jokes as usual, and little Lucy chasing her cousins around the living room. It should have been perfect, but then, as they sat together, laughing over memories and old family stories, Margaret looked at Mark and said with a gentle chuckle, "You always needed a little push in school." Emily, now she was always the responsible one. The room went still for half a second. No one said anything, but the energy shifted. Mark gave a tight smile. Emily looked down at her plate. The conversation moved on, but something hung in the air. something invisible like dust. Later that night, after everyone had left, Margaret found herself replaying that moment. A small sentence, a simple comparison. It hadn't meant anything, had it? But deep down, she knew. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, and it probably wouldn't be the last, unless she changed. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And Margaret began to realize that her children's sense of identity had slowly, quietly, absorbed the colors she had painted them with. Emily, the reliable one. Mark, the funny one. Lucy, the sensitive one. All true, but not all there was. And when we constantly frame our children through comparison, even lovingly, we teach them something dangerous, that their worth depends on how they stack up to someone else. Over the years, Margaret had noticed things she hadn't dared connect. Mark pulling away, always deflecting with humor when things got serious. Emily feeling pressure to never mess up, even when exhausted. Lucy shrinking into silence whenever the others were praised. The worst part, she hadn't meant to do it. It came from pride, from wanting to highlight their strengths. But even good intentions, repeated wrongly, can leave scars. Stoic wisdom teaches that each person must be seen as they are, not through the lens of judgment, but with the clarity of acceptance. So Margaret made a vow. From now on, she would speak to her children as individuals, not as parts of a measuring stick. She began to say things like, "Mark, I admire how you always bring light into a room. It's a gift. Emily, I'm proud of your steadiness, but remember, it's okay to fall apart sometimes. Lucy, I love the way you see things others miss. It's your quiet strength." And something beautiful happened. They relaxed around her. They opened up more. They laughed without that edge of competition in the air. Margaret saw it clearly. Each child is a garden of their own, and no rose should be told it should grow like a sunflower. If you water one plant too much and forget the others, you don't get a blooming garden, you get a forest of imbalance. She learned to praise without comparing, to love out loud without measuring, to notice without labeling. And when the next birthday came, the family gathered again. This time, as they laughed and shared stories, Margaret simply said, "I'm so lucky, not because you're better than anyone else, but because each of you is uniquely mine." And in that moment, no one flinched, because this time, her words didn't divide. They healed. It often starts with love and dreams so big they don't fit neatly into a child's small hands. Margaret had always seen potential in her daughter, Emily. From the time Emily first learned to tie her shoes, Margaret told her, "You're going to be someone important someday. You'll make us all so proud." It was meant as encouragement, a way to plant seeds of ambition. And for a while, Emily blossomed under it. Straight A's, scholarships, a prestigious internship. Margaret's heart swelled with pride every time someone said, "Your daughter is extraordinary." But behind Emily's polite smile, there was a different story, one Margaret didn't see at first. Every achievement wasn't a celebration. It was a requirement. Every mistake wasn't a lesson, it was a disappointment, even if no one said it out loud. Stoicism teaches us, do not strive to have events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do. Epictetus. Yet Margaret, like many loving parents, unconsciously wished too hard, not for herself, but for who she wanted her child to become. And expectations, even golden, beautiful ones, can become chains when they're too heavy. One evening after Emily's first real failure, a project gone wrong at work, she sat in Margaret's kitchen, her head low. "I feel like I've let everyone down," she whispered. Margaret's heart broke. In that moment, she finally saw it. The invisible backpack Emily had been carrying, stuffed with every hope, every dream, every "you'll be amazing" that Margaret had ever placed upon her shoulders. Without meaning to, she had made love conditional. tied to achievement, to success, to being someone. And that's when Margaret remembered something Don Javier once told her. Children are not vessels to be filled with our dreams. They are fires to be nurtured into their own light. That night, Margaret made a decision. She apologized, not for loving Emily, but for burdening her. "I don't need you to be extraordinary," she said, tears in her eyes. "I just need you to be yourself. Even if that means falling, changing directions, starting over, you're enough, just as you are." For the first time in a long while, Emily exhaled. And so did Margaret. From then on, the way Margaret spoke to all her children changed. Less pressure, more presence. Instead of saying you're destined for greatness, when she said, "I'm proud of your courage today." Instead of asking, "What's your next achievement?" she asked, "How are you feeling about your journey?" Small shifts, but they mattered. Because what our children need is not a finish line they're racing toward for our approval. They need a wide open field to run in, stumbling, laughing, resting, knowing love is the ground beneath their feet, not the prize at the end. And Margaret realized something else too. Expectations will always exist. It's human. But when we inflate them too much, they burst. Not just breaking dreams, but hearts too. So now, when she dreams for her children, she does it differently. Not dreaming for them, but dreaming with them. Because walking alongside them, wherever their path may lead, is the real dream. And that's a journey worth every step. It often begins so innocently. You want to help, you want to be needed. You want to feel close to the people you love most. Margaret never minded when Emily dropped off her laundry at her house, or when her son James stopped by just to raid the fridge without a hello. At first, it even felt good, a small way to stay connected, to be important. But over time, the patterns grew heavier. The favors became expectations. The gratitude disappeared. Phone calls came only when something was needed. "Mum, can you fix this?" "Mum, can you send me some money?" "Mum, can you watch the dog?" Again. "No. How are you?" "No. Thank you." No real conversation, just transactions disguised as love. At first, Margaret brushed it off. They're busy. They mean well. She told herself she was being a good mother, staying available, always. But inside, something began to ache. Stoicism reminds us, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things. Epictetus. Margaret realized that true improvement, true peace, would require giving up the illusion that being constantly needed was the same as being deeply loved. She had built a bridge of love with her children, but she had let it become a one-way street. And in doing so, she had taught them, without meaning to, that her time, her energy, even her presence were infinite, costless, unconditional resources. It wasn't their fault entirely. It was a dynamic she had helped create. One autumn afternoon, sitting quietly by her window, Margaret finally asked herself, if I disappeared tomorrow, would they even notice all the little things I gave? Or would they just miss the things I did for them? It was a painful question, but it was necessary. She understood then, allowing yourself to be taken for granted isn't proof of love. It's evidence of poor boundaries. Real love honors both sides. It's not built on endless giving. It's built on mutual respect, gratitude, and presence. So, Margaret made a decision. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. She began to say no, gently but firmly. When James asked her to do his taxes last minute, she smiled warmly and said, I believe you're capable of handling it, but if you get stuck, we can look at it together. When Emily dropped by without calling, she didn't rush to prepare lunch. Instead, she said, I'm in the middle of something important right now. Let's plan a time to really sit down and enjoy each other. At first, they were surprised, even hurt. But over time, something beautiful happened. Their conversations grew deeper. Their visits became intentional, not habitual. Their gratitude reappeared. Not forced, but real. Margaret learned that love isn't about being endlessly available. It's about being meaningfully present. Setting boundaries didn't distance her from her children. It brought them closer. Because true connection isn't built on convenience, it's built on choice. The choice to call, the choice to listen, the choice to love. Not just when it's easy, but when it's real. And Margaret finally saw herself not as a resource, but as a person, worthy of respect, worthy of reciprocity, worthy of love. As Seneca said, a gift consists not in what is done or given, but in the intention of the giver. And Margaret at last chose to give her presence, not as an obligation but as a gift wrapped not in endless sacrifice, but in wisdom, dignity, and grace. As the seasons changed outside her window, Margaret realized something had shifted inside her too. She was no longer the woman who tried to buy peace with money, or the mother who solved every problem before it could become a lesson, or the parent who blurred the lines between love and sacrifice. Instead, she had become something far more powerful, a living example of strength, serenity, and respect. Looking back on the past year, Margaret could see the old patterns clearly. The easy money that stole her children's ambition, the endless advice that robbed them of their confidence, the comparisons that built silent walls, the expectations that weighed heavy on their backs, the invisible trap of always being there, always available, until she was invisible herself. It wasn't malice, it was love, misunderstood, love without wisdom. And now she knew better. She had learned that true generosity isn't about giving everything. It's about giving the right things at the right time and trusting others to grow strong on their own. She had learned that real love, Stoic love, is spacious. It holds, but it does not suffocate. It gives, but it does not erase the self. Margaret's children began to change too, not dramatically, not overnight, but in small, meaningful ways. James, once dependent and unsure, started his own small business. Emily, once rushed and distracted, called her simply to say, "I miss you." Even little Lucas, the one she had feared would never find his way, began taking brave, small steps into his own life. They were growing, because she had given them the gift no money could buy, the space to fall, the strength to stand, the dignity of choosing their own path. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and lavender, Margaret sat alone on her porch. A soft smile touched her lips. There was no party, no parade, no grand applause for all she had learned and all she had given up. And yet, her heart had never felt so full. This, she realized, was the quiet triumph of a life well lived. Not the kind measured in gifts or sacrifices, but the kind measured in wisdom, in peace, in love that frees rather than binds. Margaret whispered a small prayer into the wind. May I always love like the sun, giving light freely but never demanding anything in return. May I never forget that real strength is not in clinging but in letting go with grace. May I trust that everything I've planted with love will bloom in its own time, not mine. And now, dear listener, the question gently turns to you. Are you giving your children, or those you love, a gift that strengthens them? Or are you giving in ways that quietly weaken them? Are you offering your love with wisdom and healthy boundaries? Or are you holding too tightly, hoping to be needed? Remember, you are not here to live your children's lives. You are not here to shield them from every storm. You are here to be the steady light they can navigate by, even when you are far away. The greatest gift you can give is not money, not advice, not endless availability. It is trust. It is faith in their resilience. It is the deep, steady knowledge that they are capable, and that your love is the silent strength that stands behind them, cheering always. And perhaps, as Margaret discovered, when you let go, that's when they finally find their wings. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to receive more wisdom each week. Share this video with someone who might need this gentle reminder today. And if you feel called to, leave a comment sharing one lesson you're taking with you, because your journey might inspire someone else too. Thank you for being part of this community.